All right, welcome back. We're gonna get started here. Um, so, as you know, you have an exam that you need to be taking. It's due on Thursday, or Thursday is when it's gonna disappear. So, sorry if you tried taking it and it was locked. I messed up on one of the settings, but I don't think that applies to too many people. So today can be a day to review. If you have questions about the exam, if you don't, I will just go forward with the class material. But I did want to let you know that next Thursday, I'm going to have to just not hold class that day. And so I'm going to have to rearrange some of our material, I decided. And I think I'm going to shrink down the part about the research process, which would be our next big topic, and expand, and get right into the more interesting stuff. I'll try to make sure that we do cover some of the main ideas of the research process along the way, but I think you'll be happy that I don't spend as much time as I normally do on that particular topic. So, all right, so that kind of hopefully gets us up to speed. I'm hoping we can just get this exam out of the way and start on Thursday with the new material, or even today if you're ready for that. But why don't I first see what questions or topics would you like me to cover again from our discussion of, so the other day I gave you the broad overview of what it's about, and I've posted several times the review guide that has all the questions you need to know for the exam. I'll go ahead and put that up on screen if that helps, but let me know, what would you like me to cover? Or do you not know? If you don't know what you don't know, that's another concern I have, because hopefully you've been preparing for the exam, and if not, you might want to ask yourself, why not? I think sometimes people don't take sociology that seriously, maybe. But I do, and so I'm expecting you to be prepared for the exam. All right, so who does have questions then? Sometimes what I do during review sessions, if nobody can come up with a question within like 30 seconds, I just end the review session. Because I think I've been pretty fair about giving you plenty of time to try and get ready for this exam on your own. And I can't take it for you. So if you haven't been looking at the review guide, if you haven't been trying to figure out what you need to know for the exam, then that's not my fault, is it? Is how I'm feeling. I don't want to get mad at you guys, but I think I've been very clear. Have I not? Maybe I haven't. Maybe you didn't know there's an exam that you're supposed to take. Maybe you haven't been getting the, I mean, you could make an argument I haven't been clear because I put it on Canvas and not live, and you guys are a live class. So you could say, well, I need live exam. If you do, we can set that up. I can get you set up in the library with a proctored exam if that's how you prefer to do things. But either way, students are expected to prepare themselves for the exam. I've done my part. I lectured, I re-lectured, I'm offering a review session. I don't know what more I can do, but I'm asking you for your questions about the review right now. Okay, we don't have to have a review. I can send you home and we won't. And then I'll just start on the new material. Or actually, I'll just start on the new material, okay? Whatever. Used to be students cared about their grade, and if you care about your grade, you care about preparing for the exam. Pages.
Where can I find the study guide?
Well, it's on Canvas, and so again, I've really tried to make it clear, but I'm going to go again. I'm going to show everybody right now. Again, what this class is asking me to do, but has anybody been to Canvas yet? and looked at the things that are on Canvas. Okay, Canvas is where the study guide is. I've showed it several times. I posted it. Are you not getting the announcements? When I post announcements, they should be going right to your email. And if you're not checking your Yuba College email, then you're again not engaging in the school the way you're supposed to. As a student, you're supposed to be logging on, checking your Yuba College email. If you don't like checking your college email, I think there's a way that you can set it up so that it goes to some other email, like Gmail, or even text you. I'm pretty sure. So I'm allowed to use Canvas as support for my live class. So the school encourages that, in fact, because I gotta log in here. Sorry, I don't know why. All right, so here's Zoom. Here's Canvas. And Canvas, if you don't know where to find that, well, that's when you log into Yuba College. I don't know what your apps dashboard looks like. This is what mine looks like. And one of the apps that you get as a Yuba College student is Canvas. I think you probably also get Outlook and other things that help you stay engaged. But if you go to Canvas, then you go scroll down and you'll see that you have what's called a dashboard, which is all your classes. All your classes have a shelf. Your live classes, your online classes. They might not be populated or with stuff, but this one is. See, Sociology, we're in M8018. And there's a lot of things on here that can help you that I've tried to show you several times. One of the main things that can help you is what's called the modules. So whenever you take an online course, most of the course is done through the modules. So this course has modules. And if you follow along with them, you're following along with this class. And you're seeing all the things, in my mind, that we're doing. We started out with who are you sociologically, we got into sociological terms, we talked about the founding fathers, and then we had an exam. Or no, then we talked about conflict theory, then we had an exam, then we went into functionalism, then we went into symbolic interactionism. Now we're having a second exam. And all these things that are on, and if you go into your second exam, it's there already. But you can also go into the instructions for the second exam. And you can see there's a review here already. There is a review guide, review questions for second exam. And you can watch an old review session I took. It's all if you care about doing well in school. But if you don't care, then there's nothing I can do. So, does anybody have any questions for me to review before the exam that you have to take by Thursday? And if you don't take it, then you fail the class, because the way that the exam works is there's 4 things you're graded on in this class, as I've made clear. 3 exams and your engagement. So if you miss one, then you would only have, like, at best 75% of the class, and you wouldn't really have that because I would ding you for engagement too, and then you wouldn't pass. So please get ready to take this exam. It's a serious thing. It's something I'm judged on. Right now I'm being evaluated. You saw she came in she surveyed you. I'm under pressure to do a good job at this school. If I don't do a good job, they fire me. And then my kids are hungry. I've been trying to do a good job. If I'm not, then you can let me know. You can send me emails and say, I'm not understanding.
Question about how does globalization affecting race relations in America?
Okay, so let me try to situate us again, because I think if you just randomly try to answer something, it doesn't make sense. So we looked at the social construction of reality, because if you go back to the beginning of symbolic interactionism, we've learned about it in stages in this class. We started out with an overview and we said, what's its metaphor for understanding the world? And we said symbolic interactionism sees the world as a play, as a performance. And it sees reality as a kind of socially constructed thing. In other words, what's actually happening, like in this room right now, it's by agreement, by us all agreeing to have a class, we're having a class. And if you don't agree, like you don't do the things I ask, like study for the exam, then that's not the reality, it's some other reality. And that's why I'm sitting here getting all upset and you guys are just sitting there. So to have an actual class, it requires everybody to make it happen, play their part. Pretend you're a student, I pretend I'm a teacher, and then we have a successful class. And so that's what social construction of reality is all about from symbolic interactionist perspective. And we tried to look at race and gender as two examples of things that aren't really there just because the universe gave it to us, but are there because we as a group of people have created these kind of scripts and dramas and plays to create this sense that there is these differences based on race and gender. That's the argument we're trying to make. I mean, there are physical differences between people, but what those mean and how they affect our day-to-day life and what we get to do or not get to do or where we get to go or not get to go, those are a matter of social behaviors, like people passing laws, people writing articles, people arguing with each other. I mean, all of this social life is what creates a reality where, depending on what race you have, you may be in a very good situation or not, or depending on your gender. Like, do you have the right to change? Do you have the right to say, so like right now in California, a big argument is, can I go to school and say that you have to call me a different pronoun? Could I say that my name is Mark, but I'd rather be called Marcy because I feel much more like a Marcy than a... And California is having a big argument about that. Some right-wing parents say, I as a parent should know when my kids are doing that. And other people say, no, if you're a person, an individual person, you should have the right to what name people call you and how you identify. So this question of whose right is it to decide what gender pronoun a kid uses at school, is that something God told us? No, we have to decide as humans what kind of reality we want. And we're debating it as a state, and we do it through the democratic process. Anyway, so that's an example of gender right now in our state being constructed. And race too, this question of what are you going to put on the census? What boxes can you check that identify your race? That too is in flux, and we're still debating it as a society. And so we looked at the social construction of both things, race and gender, but we tried to say that they're very related to each other. And so it's hard to talk about them separately, but I kind of did. I focused on the social construction of race, and I looked at three different examples. We started with what I call laissez-faire racism. And that was by Bobo and Smith. And then we looked at something called racialization of Asian Americans. And that was by Ancheta. And then we looked at what I'll just call assimilation of Mexican Americans. And that was by Suro. So I'm citing these people because that's part of getting into our next batch of material, is thinking of sociology as people doing research and trying to come up with findings about things. And that's what all these people have done. They've done research on the social construction of race, and these are their findings that I'm sharing with you. And I've chosen these particular findings to share with you because I think they help us understand this idea that race is a socially constructed idea. And I'm trying to help it connect with your sociological biographies. I mean, I try to focus on, some of us have, racial and ethnic backgrounds related to material. I'm trying to find a better marker. And so I'm not gonna right now review all three of these, but they all had certain similarities and certain differences in looking at race. We said that this one focused on racial ideologies. and how they've changed over time. This one focused on racialization and foreigner versus immigrant racialization. And this one focused on what we call the ladder of assimilation. And so there were certain similarities in these perspectives, but also certain differences. When it came to understanding the racial ideologies, we had a focus on what was called group position. And I'm just trying to highlight some of the main points here and tie it to the question you asked. But one of the questions I asked on the review is, how does globalization, how is that a theme, or how did that affect race relations? And the point I made in my lectures is, all three of these authors talk about globalization in some way. And if you think about globalization, it can help you understand the similarities between their arguments. And so how do they talk about globalization? Well, racial ideologies are this idea that elites, rule over regular people, the masses, you could say. Elites are the powerful people of a society, the rich people, the powerful people. And this argument is that elites create belief systems. This is racial ideologies I'm talking about. They create belief systems to justify and explain, the way I put it was justify and explain why they're the elite and you're not. And elites have always done that. Throughout history, elites have tried to create an ideology to explain why we are the elite and you are not the elite. So when slavery was they're making a historical argument that there's been a few periods in America. There's been sort of three main racial ideologies. The first one was the one that justified and explained slavery. I wrote the masses here, but really the way I put it in class was economic and social arrangements in the society. But that's what is trying to be justified and explained. But it's the regular people that are being explained too. When we say racial ideology, we mean a story that's told, a belief system that is put out there. It's put out in things like books and newspapers and TV shows. I mean, in those days, they didn't have TV shows, but they had magazines, they had books, they had telegraphs, they had other ways of spreading ideas. And slavery was a very brutal system. If you were an elite in slavery, you needed a good explanation for it. And so the racial ideology that explained slavery was the idea of the race concept, this idea of biological inferiority. The reason people are slaves, according to this theory, is because they're just lower down on the totem pole biologically than other people, and they just have to be slaves because they can't take care of themselves, they can't learn to read, they can't learn to do any of the things that civilized society needs, and so civilized society needs to enslave them. Well, that lie became obviously true once you didn't need human beings to pick cotton. Slavery was based on an economic fact that if you employed a bunch of people for no money picking cotton, you could make a lot of money doing that. But once machines were invented that could pick cotton, then it was not profitable to be forcing people to do the work because people need food and stuff like that. Machines don't, and machines don't need sleep. So if you can have a machine to do it, it's much better than having humans. And so the new reality in America was industrial capitalism. And you have to kind of know history here. So this is from like 1600 till about 1865, when the Civil War ended. The Civil War ended slavery, but was it just the war that ended slavery? Or was it this new economic fact that you had machines, you had industry? Industrial capitalism means factories. You had factory farms with big machines doing most of the work. And that kind of system, industrial capitalism, needs a new ideology. If you have an ideology in industrial capitalism that says certain people are just biologically inferior and can't do the work that other people do, well, then you can't legally employ them. Why would I pay people that can't take care of themselves to do work? But in this system, you do want to pay people. And you don't really care if I'm a capitalist, if I'm an elite who runs a factory farm. I don't really care what your background is, what your religious beliefs are, who you are. I just want you to run the machine. And if you can do it, and you do it for the amount of pay I pay you, then I don't really care about your race or your DNA or anything like that. I just want someone who will work hard and not complain. So the new ideology in America at that time was biological equality. And for many years, Americans were taught to believe that we're all created equal. We're all here to compete with each other freely in our capitalist system. And if you want to get ahead, you should work hard and you should try hard and be a good employee, not, and we're not going to say that certain people are, just genetically inferior to others. Everybody has the right to work. Black people, Mexican people, white people, women people, everybody can work. And that ideology worked pretty well. We noted that America was a very successful country from 1865, especially up through 1985. From 1945 to 1985, America was the dominant country in the world with that golden age of capitalism we talked about, the great prosperity, when every American believed I should work hard, I should be a good employee, we should, we'll get ahead as a person and as a country when we do that. But then a new economic reality started to take place, globalization. Globalization now means elites don't make their money by employing Americans to work for us. These elites go and find people in other countries, China and all over the world, to make their products. And so that's a new economic reality, globalization. And it means that the elites, the Elon Musk, the Bill Gates, the rich people of America, Apple Computer, when we ask them, well, why are you sending all these jobs to China? Like, shouldn't Americans be making Apple phones, iPhones and stuff here? If you're an American company, shouldn't we be doing that? And so they need an ideology that says, yes, it's okay that we build our iPhones in China, employing people who work 20 hours a day to make your phones. And Walmart, why are all these products that poor Americans are buying at Walmart are being made by even poorer Chinese people somewhere else? Well, Walmart likes it. The Walton family are some of the richest people in the world. But if you ask the Waltons, do you love America? Why won't you employ Americans? They have to have an ideology that explains it. And the new one says, well, you're culturally inferior. Cultural inferiority. You're lazy. You're entitled. But how does this look? In other words, where do we see this ideology? Well, we see it with people saying America has a culture of entitlement, that we just think things should be handed to us without working. That we are a country of obesity. We're just a bunch of fat people and we're lazy. And we're a country of, well, now people are saying woke and all these things, and, they're just social justice and just, weak and, transgender. I mean, all this stuff about gender, about Americans are weak and lazy and stupid. And so we had to send your jobs to places where people will work hard. Chinese people, they work hard. They're not questioning their gender. They're not trying to be woke. They're just going to work and working hard. I mean, where do we really see this ideology? One example was when welfare was ended. So we mentioned that earlier in this class, that globalization undid a lot of the things that saved capitalism. When we made America great from 1945 to 1985, it was when we had a strong social safety net, like welfare and Medicare and all kinds of things. It was when we had a strong middle class. It was when we had a lot of high taxes on the wealthy so that working people could have good schools and good healthcare and things like that. But in the globalization era, we've cut taxes on the wealthy. We've gotten rid of the social safety net mostly, and the middle class is shrinking. So all these things that make America not great anymore, the elites are doing fine. I should show you there's a new meme going around that shows the great prosperity from 1945 to 1985. the Great Prosperity, when all Americans were rising together. I showed this chart earlier in the class where all Americans were doing better from 1945 to 1985. After 1985, only some Americans are doing really, really well. And the rest of us are actually going downhill. And that elite, those people that are doing really, really well, they have to explain why it's okay that they're getting to be billionaires and the rest of us are not even doing as well as we were in the 80s and 70s. And so when they ended welfare, Bill Clinton and the Democrats said, we're going to end welfare as we know it. And the new bill was called the Personal Responsibility Act. The argument that we were sold, the ideology that we were sold, is that we have to cut welfare because poor black women and poor Mexican women are just sitting around getting free money from the government, and that's harming America, and America's going downhill because of that. Well, the real reason, I'm saying to you as a sociologist, is because elites knew they could make a lot more money going to other countries. But they don't want to blame themselves and say it's because we're greedy that we want to put America, end welfare. They wanted to make themselves look virtuous. We're trying to make the world a better place by doing this and get these poor black people off their butts and back to work. Well, what they didn't explain was there are no jobs for a lot of poor, uneducated people in America anymore. You can't support a family on the kind of jobs you can get in the service sector and things like that. And if you're a single person with children at home and going to work all day, it means you need childcare, and we don't have that in this country. And so it's just not a fair thing to say that poor women are the reason we had to send jobs to other places. It's a cop-out. It's fake. It's fake news is what Trump would call it. And so, yeah, a lot of Americans are mad at the elite. But the elite had to come up with an ideology that would explain why they did what they did. And the ideology they came up with was cultural inferiority, or what Bobo and Smith call laissez-faire racism. It's this idea, laissez-faire means free market, meaning government shouldn't help poor people. Because it should be a free market. And if you want to get ahead and succeed, you should get up off your ass and go do that. Don't expect the government to help you. But again, that's an ideology that doesn't look at the fact that some of the biggest welfare payments in America go to the richest corporations, like rice farmers around here. Tons of rice farmers around here getting free money from the government to do what? Nothing. Don't grow rice. Well, pay money to not grow rice. That's called corporate welfare. But the same people that complain about poor women getting food stamps to pay for their children's food are the same ones getting millions of dollars from the government to not grow rice. Around here, the politicians. So is it truth they're giving you, or is it a constructed reality where poor people are the reason America is going downhill, not these greedy rich people that are taking up all the land and all the money? So anyway, that's so yeah, they're kind of conflict theorists. I'm giving you Bobo and Smith while we're talking about symbolic interactionism, but theirs is a more critical kind of conflict theory type of symbolic interactionism, in that they're saying the reason this ideology was created was because of the economic conflict between the wealthy and the poor in America. And the wealthy are just trying to justify their own wealth and their lack of help for the poor people. Gated communities are a good example of what we're talking about here. Since the 1980s, a lot of rich people have decided to live in communities that are gated and keep themselves in a totally different world from regular people. And that's a sign that they don't really see regular people as their allies, as their fellow Americans. They just see them as potential threats. But anyway, so globalization clearly affects that argument, laissez-faire racism. What about the second one? I talked about racialization of Asian Americans, and that was about foreigner versus immigrant racialization. Remember, racialization is the idea that, again, you're not just born with a race. When we talk about Asian Americans, again, there's a lot of diversity there. It's people from China, Korea, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, all over the place. And they're very different peoples with very different languages and very different looks, really. But if you just focus on certain things like, skin color or eye shape or something, then you just say, well, they're all one thing. They're Asian. Okay, whatever. But when you try to figure out, well, what do they mean in America? So sometimes in America, Asian Americans have been treated as, so the point here is Asian American, race in America is defined as white and black mainly. It's this binary definition of what race is all about. And it makes sense because it goes back to that ideology that justified slavery. And if you're black, you're not free, and if you're white, you are. And so they didn't have to talk about anybody else at that time, but now we have other groups here that aren't squarely within the white or the black group. So where do they fit? And Asian America, Chinese people have been in America as long as many white Europeans. So it's not accurate to say that Asians are newer Americans, but that's how they're often treated, as if they're just new immigrants. Even when, if you looked at their family tree, they've been here longer than a lot of white people. Like I use myself as an example. My family's only been here since the 20th century, since the early 1900s. There's plenty of Chinese Americans in the Marysville area whose families go all the way back to the 1830s. And yet when they walk down the street, they're treated more like a new person, a new American than I am. And so the actual fact is they're much more established American than I am, but the construction of race, the reality we live in a race is, oh, you're Asian, you must not be a real American. Well, yeah, I am. And so immigrant racialization, and so we said this was a sort of non-hostile kind of racialization. It shows up in ways like people asking you before they ask you what time it is, saying something, oh, excuse me, do you speak English? Oh, okay, you know what time it is? Or when you go for a job and you have Asian features and they say like, you have your green card? You're like, well, yeah, my family's been here since 1830, bro. How long has yours been? So it's subtle, it's not discriminatory, but it's not nice. It's what we might call microaggression. That's a term people use nowadays. I don't know how I feel about that term, but if you've ever experienced a microaggression, you probably know what I'm talking about, a thing where somebody makes you feel like you're different and maybe less than because of your looks, because of your race, your racial look. And but foreigner racialization is much more hostile, and it can be quite discriminatory. The clearest example was during World War II, when Japanese Americans, the entire Japanese American population was interred and jailed. We were at war with Italy too, and Germany too, but we didn't jail our entire Italian American and our entire German American populations. We did jail or lock up a few people in those groups, but they were people with had shown actual evidence of serving Germany or serving Japan. But these Japanese Americans were American people. They just happened to have ancestry in Japan. And so that's an example of just being treated differently for no other reason than your quote unquote race. And the idea was somehow white people are the normal Americans, so they're trustworthy, but these Asian people with Asian features are not normal Americans. And again, how does globalization play in? Well, the question is when, and so one of the similarities between both these arguments about race that I've talked about is that it's not a linear thing. Sociology used to believe that racism had a kind of linear quality, meaning that it would eventually go away. If you compared like 2000 to 1900 and you were looking at racism, or I'll call it prejudice, people feeling bad about, people not liking the other groups. The idea was that it was going down. So I'm showing it was high in 1900 and 2000, it's lower. And the idea was that it was going to go lower because of education. That the more that people got educated and went to college and learned about other groups, and we have today a cultural festival at Yuba College meant to educate people about other cultures, and you wouldn't be getting that if you didn't go to Yuba College. So the idea was people going to college are going to learn how to deal with other people and cultural diversity better than people who haven't. But what Bobo and Smith showed in the article I talked about earlier is, well, no, race hostility towards Black people has kind of gone up and down in American history, depending on the ideology and depending on group position. But I won't go into that point right now. And Chet is saying the same thing about Asian Americans. There's hostility towards Asian Americans, but it's not just a linear thing that started high and is going low. It's sometimes high, sometimes low, sometimes higher, sometimes lower. It's what we would call in statistics curvilinear. Linear is when it's just always going in one direction, but curvilinear is more like that. And so she asks, well, when is it a high point on this curvilinear thing? When is the hostility high and when is the hostility low? When the hostility is high, then we treat our Asians as if they're foreigners. When the hostility is low, we treat them as if they're just immigrants. It's both a form of racialization, of keeping people kind of separate. But this one happens, she says, when America feels threatened by actual Asian countries. When we feel like we're in competition or fighting with other Asian countries, that's when we start getting harder on our own Asian American people. And so globalization is one of those times. Globalization is now a time when America is in competition with China, with India, with other countries, with Russia, and we call that an Asian country now. And so America feels like, okay, well, we're in competition with those places, and the theory would be then Asian Americans here are now feeling more heat, more pressure, more hostility because of their race than they did maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago when globalization pressures were lower. And I don't know what evidence, I mean, I think there is evidence for that theory is holding. I mean, there's been more hate crimes against Asians around and more talk about hatred toward Asian Americans. And then the third one we looked at was about Mexican Americans and their patterns of assimilation. So the big question there was, compared to other immigrant groups in America, I mean, America is all immigrant groups really, except for Native Americans. And so all Americans have to deal with that fact, you weren't original to this land. So if we start comparing groups on how they deal, how much they've blended into American culture, that's what assimilation means. Mexican Americans have done it more slowly as a group, on average. The families have. And Soro, the author of this article, says, well, that has to do with a variety of factors that I talked about fairly recently in this class. We talked about the conditions of immigration, like why would you come over and what were, how did you make it over and things like that. And so if you're coming over to this country, escaping like religious persecution, like a lot of Sikh people have, that's a different kind of reason to come to this country than if you come here because your country is poor and there's no jobs for you. Or if you come across a sea, that's different than coming just across the border on foot. And so there's different conditions, and those conditions of immigration mean that we need to look at what he calls the ladder of assimilation. So Mexican American families have assimilated, they just do it in a more stepwise fashion over a longer period of time. And he says they do it by generation. So the first generation is at the bottom of the ladder, and the fifth generation is up here. And what does the ladder consist of? It consists of jobs, basically. So when you first come in, you're a first generation immigrant, you can get like farm labor. But by the time your children graduate high school and your grandchildren graduate college and your great-grandchildren go to grad school, now the fifth generation is like, doctors and lawyers. But what are these middle rungs? The middle rungs were things like factory worker and factory manager, industrial jobs. If you look at a lot of Mexican American families, if we were to gather data, and this is getting to the next question, next topic of the class, but that's what we do as sociologists, try to gather data. And what kind of data could we gather about this? Well, if you went to and interviewed a bunch of Mexican American people about their family's history, when did you guys come over from Mexico? What kind of work did your parents do? Were they married before they came, or did they get married after? I mean, if you were doing all this questioning about people's stories, about how they got to America and when and how long it took before they were fully Americanized, you might find that a lot of those families had somewhere in their past people very involved in industrial work, factory work. And as I've been trying to stress all semester long, it's industrial work, manufacturing, industrial work, those jobs, those are what have been hurt most by globalization. Those are the jobs that have been offshored, sent to other places. So Soro in this article says, what's going to happen to the future of Mexican Americans if one of the main ways they've climbed into America is no longer there? If we don't have factory jobs and factory management jobs, how will typical working class Mexican Americans move up from poverty into upper middle class? And globalization is the reason for that erasing of those rungs. And because those rungs have erased, other people have fallen down. So some people fall down the ladder, including Mexican Americans that used to be in those kinds of jobs. And what kind of jobs are they competing for? Not just farm labor, but low-level service jobs. And lots of American workers are now competing for those jobs, whether they're white or black or Hmong or Mexican or any Asian group. And so that means there's a lot more competition for low-paying jobs and low, affordable neighborhoods. So competition over jobs, over housing. And that means more hostility. That's another general point we've been making is hostility between people isn't just something that comes from people's psychology, like I don't like black people or something. It comes from people's economic interests. And groups tend to group up with each other when they're feeling threatened economically. If you're an individual and you feel like you've got plenty of opportunities anywhere you want to go, then you don't necessarily hate anyone. You're like, oh, I want to go meet them, I'll go work with them, I'll work with them. But if you're feeling like I might not get a job, no one's going to hire me, then you might feel the need to only be around your own group. And I better find some other people like me that will hire me. And I better be afraid of those other people that don't look like me. I see a lot of people in this community complaining. They'll say, oh, those Sikh people, the Indian people, they only hire other Indian people. They'll never hire a Mexican person or a black person. And that kind of feeling about the other groups, that happens when jobs are tight. When there's plenty of jobs, I don't hear people saying, oh, those Indians, they never hire anybody, because they probably will hire more people when they need people. But when jobs are tight, maybe it is natural for somebody who owns a business to want to hire other people from their own ethnic group, or especially their own immigrant group. But anyway, so is that making sense now that this idea of globalization, we can see it's a recurring theme that popped up when we talked about laissez-faire racism. It popped up when we talked about Asian Americans, and it's coming in now when we're talking about Mexican Americans. So I am also trying to connect us back to our earlier material, which was all about capitalism and how the changing structure of capitalism is affecting our lives. And we saw, for example, like 2 American families. They were different races. As working people, when they had good jobs, they seemed to be very happy Americans and not wanting to hate on anyone. But as things got tight, they lost their good jobs, their houses got foreclosed on. You could sense a little more ethnic tension. They didn't come out and say it, but like the white family's boys were carrying guns and stuff, and they kept getting in gang fights, and I think there might have been an ethnic component to the kinds of fights they were getting into. And the black family said their kids were getting jumped into gangs and stuff, and gangs are, again, a sign of ethnic conflict. So is that making sense? Do you feel like you can answer the question now? So I use that one little question about globalization, I'm using it to review a lot of stuff here. So we reviewed laissez-faire racism, we reviewed racialization of Asian Americans, and we reviewed the ladder of assimilation. So that's all the material I gave you on the social construction of race. We also talked about the social construction of gender, so you may want me to cover some of that again. So who's got other questions you want me to cover? All right, here's the review guide. Actually, this alternative format is not as good. I'm gonna close this one. And I'm gonna go to, another way you can find the review guide, by the way, is to go to Files. Files is another place, so this is very helpful, I think, if you go to Files, because for one thing, all the lecture outlines are here. So if you wanna know about lecture outline, it's a little hard to tell where we're at, but they're more or less in order. So we finished up with this lecture out, so we did social construction, gender, symbolic interaction, well, these are the same. And we're going to be going into the research process next. So if you want to get ready for our next set of material, you want to start downloading that one and looking at that. But a better way to find these lecture outlines, by the way, is right in the modules, because then they're in the right order and stuff like that. But in Files, in addition to the lecture outlines, there's something called review guides for exams. And you go to review guides for exams, review guide questions for exam questions, and they're all in different formats. That's a long story. Has to do with accessibility. But the ones that don't say AF, I find are easier to read. So this one says review questions for second exam. And this one is a little clearer to read, in my view. But anyway, so I've tried to break it up into the basic topics that we did. We started with what is functionalism? And remember, we looked at two topics under that, deviance and religion. With deviance and crime, there's several questions that I'm expecting you to know, quite a few. And then we get in a whole bunch of stuff about crime, deviance, norms, all that stuff, in the order that I covered it. So we started with, what is deviance and conformity? What are norms? What are the different types of norms? What does it mean to look at the functions of something like norms? And what are the positive and manifest latent functions of norms? In general, what does that mean? And how does it apply to norms? Well, that gets us to strain theory and a whole bunch of different crime theories that we began to look at. By the way, that was another place where we got a little introduction to symbolic interactionism, because we looked at symbolic interactionist theories. And I just realized I'm missing something on here that you should have there. It never has what is labeling theory. I should have had that on here. After adaptations to strain and before social learning theory, it should have something in there about labeling theory. But remember, labeling theory was a theory from symbolic interactionism, and just like our discussions of race and gender, it looked at the idea that reality is often a social construction. So who we consider to be criminal or not may not be so much a matter of their own behavior as much as a matter of how they're being labeled and constructed by the institutions and relationships they're part of. So we use, for example, teen girl being constructed as a drug user, even when she wasn't really wanting to be that. Anyway, so labeling theory can tie in with symbolic interactionism. And then we got into religion, and I looked at the three founding fathers, and I introduced you to some basic famous ideas from each one of them, like religion is the opiate of the masses, collective effervescence, that's from Marx, collective effervescence from Durkheim, and the whole idea of the Protestant ethic, which comes from Weber. And then we got into social construction of race and gender, and I've already talked to you about the race. I notice on here that some things are in italics. You can ignore the italics. That was, I don't remember why I ever put that in italics. I think it's because at one point I had to remove that material from a test, so I was telling the students, you don't need to know that part. But you guys do. I definitely covered patterns of assimilation, ladder of assimilation, globalization. So this is the study guide. All these questions are things you should know. And if you don't know them, then you should be asking me, like, what is the difference between sex and gender, Dr. Flax? I don't know if I know that. And you're going to have to write an essay on Tough Guys 2. So if you haven't gone and seen Tough Guys 2, you need to have done that. I've been posting again. If you haven't been getting my messages from Canvas, then you need to go to Canvas. And one of the places you need to go, if you want to stay engaged, is what is called the announcements. So a lot of the stuff I'm giving you, like people ask, where can I find the link, the Zoom link, so I can join class? Well, you can find it by going to the announcements and going down the list. And welcome to Watch Live and in Person. I mean, if you look at all these, and you can say, well, where are the old videos? Like you can actually watch all the lectures. If you missed any of this class, I've been posting all our class meetings on YouTube. So you can go to YouTube and watch our lectures again. Here they all are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So these are all our lectures that we did this semester. And if you missed anything, I'm hoping you go there. But the announcements are a great place to find things you know I said, but you can't remember what they were or where to find them. Like if you go back to this list of announcements, the lectures on YouTube, homework for next week. So if you needed the link to Tough Guys, I gave the link to Two American Families earlier, but more recently, I've, if you look at these announcements, given you links to Tough Guys, I've given you study guides. So again, when I say I've been doing my part, it's in these announcements, it's Canvas, but if you're not doing your part of going on Canvas and looking at the stuff, then we're not connecting, we're not engaging, but you have to take the steps to engage. So still now questions? What else can I cover?
What do you mean by why did the instructors say that social bond theory is conservative but has led to liberal findings?
Okay, do you remember social bond theory? So you need to know social bond theory more importantly, and that because there's several questions about that. And then there is one question on the exam about the liberal versus conservative. But let's say a little bit about crime theories, because that's a big set of questions on the exam. So we looked at crime theories, but our overall topic was functionalism. And so functionalism is really interested in crime. And the question of, we said functionalism is all about social stability and social solidarity. It's a perspective that's really focused on getting everybody to work together as a well-oiled machine, as we talked about earlier in the class, everybody being in harmony with each other, everybody being on the same page. That's what functionalism is all about. And that's why it's interested in crime, because crime is a clear example when people are not on the same page, and some people are violating other people's expectations. We said that norms, which are the basis of social order and stability, are ideally they're shared by everybody. But when some people don't respect the norms, then it feels like society's in conflict and it's not in solidarity and it's not harmonious. So crime is a big topic for functionalism. And the main theory we looked at was strain theory as coming from functionalism. But then we said there's other perspectives to help us understand what functionalism is and to see its limitations. We said, well, let's look at some other theories of crime, symbolic interactionist theories of crime. And we looked at labeling theory, as I was just talking about, and learning theory, and differential association theory. And then we said, well, what does conflict theory have to say about crime? And we said that conflict theory doesn't care that much about crime, but more about the elites trying to control everybody through law and the courts. So it focuses more on crime control than crime. But then we said, well, what about, and all through, and this again ties in with the material we're about to start studying. Theories are all what are used for research, or they go hand in hand. In other words, the reason people are doing research is to find out why things happen. And theories are efforts to try and explain why things happen. But if we don't go and collect data, then we don't know if our theories are correct. And so the research process, which we're going to talk about after this exam, is about collecting data to test theories. And so theories look like this. If you want to break them down, theories are trying to explain how one thing causes another, or trying to explain, if usually it focuses on the thing that's being caused, like what causes crime. If we have too much of it in society, we want to figure out why it's happening. Or, that's too broad of a question, but there's different ways to ask it, like what causes an individual to be involved in crime versus some other individual? Or why do some communities have more crime than other communities? Or why do certain time periods have more crime than other time periods? But there's a lot of, if crime is the thing you're trying to explain, there's a lot of different theories about why that is. And the theories should explain, a good theory explains a lot of the variance, it's called. Crime goes up and down, right? If you're looking at time periods, some time periods crime is higher. Or if you're looking at individual behavior, some individuals have higher crime commission than others. Or if you're looking at places, some places have higher crime commission than other places. So there's different ways to look at the variation of crime, but if you're trying to look at the variation of it, you're trying to explain the variance. Your explanation should explain the variance. It should explain why it's going up and down. Like, why would crime be low in one place and high in another? Your theory should help explain that. And then if it's true, we should be able to go look at other places where crime is high or low and see if your theory holds there. And one of the points we made was that strain theory doesn't do that good a job of explaining the variance. Functionalism tries to explain crime as people not really obeying the norms. Like, why are they not obeying them? And the simplistic explanation is they're not obeying them because they don't know them. And if we just teach them, socialize them right, then they'll follow the rules. Well, strain theory, which comes from Merton, was a little more sophisticated than that because it said, well, sometimes people know the rules and they still break them. So why is that? How do we explain that? And he said, it's because of strain. It's because people, if we really look at how you follow rules, it isn't just knowing it. You have to be able to. You have to have the means to follow it. So the goal and the means. And when those two things are in tension, in strain with each other, then people have to come up with some solution to that. Like, I want a lot of money, but I can't get there with college and jobs, so I'll get there with selling cocaine. It's an innovation. But in a way, it is conformity. It's deviance in one way, but in another way, it's conformity. But anyway, strain, so I won't go all over strain theory again, but if you're trying to explain variance, like why do some, if we're looking at according to strain theory, if you grow up in a poor community, you should be much more likely than somebody in a rich community to be a criminal. Because you would have a lot more strain, given the fact that America says you're supposed to go get rich. And our poor communities often don't have legitimate ways to do that. So it shouldn't be surprising that people turn to illegitimate ways to get rich in America when they don't have legitimate ways. But when we actually go look at the data and go look at who is criminal in these poor communities, it's a very small minority of people. So if we're trying to explain variance, the vast majority of the kids growing up in those poor areas don't become criminals. So how useful was this strain theory for explaining that? We're trying to explain the variance. Maybe you explain why, yeah, there's some kids got into crime to make money because they didn't have legitimate means to do that. But 95% of them didn't. And they didn't have legitimate means. So what's your explanation for that? You have to explain the variance. Not only the ones that did do the crime, but the ones that didn't. They're part of the variation. And so we said labeling theory, symbolic interactionist theories, were helpful in kind of pointing out the limitations of a theory that just looks at the conditions people face. If we want to understand people's behavior, we have to look a little bit internally inside them at how they see themselves, how others see them, the way they're treated in day-to-day life by people like authorities. And so if you look at like differences in race and stuff like that, and how people are labeled differently, there's a lot to it more than just, I wanted money and so I went and sold drugs. In terms of trying to understand who gets involved and who doesn't. And symbolic interactionist theories, one of their best ways of explaining it is differential association. If you want to explain who gets involved in crime and who doesn't, well, one of the best predictors of it is, are you exposed to other people involved with crime? Are you able to learn it from other people? It's part of learning theory. The way you learn crime is by being around people who do it. And if you're not around people who do it, it's going to be hard for you to become a criminal. And so that's a better theory in terms of explaining the variance. If you went and tried to figure out in a poor community with a lot of strain in it, why are most kids not involved in crime, and if you went and looked at who is, you could probably find a lot of evidence for the fact that the ones who are learned it from people who already were involved. And so that helps explain why in communities where there isn't already a lot of crime, kids have a harder time getting involved with it. And in communities where there is a lot of crime, kids have more of a chance of it. But that's a good reason why we should be more careful about what kinds of circumstances kids are growing up in. But the theory is better, it's more refined. Just instead of just saying it's being poor that makes you prone to be a criminal, it's saying being poor and being exposed to other criminals and learning from them. That's the key. Conflict theory, I won't go into that, but that one said, why are we even surprised that in a totally unequal society that's all about money, that there's quite a few people turning to crime to do that? But the more interesting question for them is, how do the elite try to use the law and the courts and the police to maintain their power and privilege over the people? But then we asked about, we said, if you're trying to explain this variance, 95% of people are not involved in crime. So like the variance is like less than 5%. I don't even know how to write that, but I don't even know how to write it. But what I'm trying to say is, if you look at any community, even when it's high crime, the vast majority of the people there are not criminals. So if all your theoretical attention is focused on why are this small group of people, why are they such criminals, and all the other people are being normal and you're not studying them, and you're like, why are they criminals? Well, maybe a better question, a better approach would be, stop looking at these guys and look at all the people that aren't criminals and try to understand them. Why are they conformists? And so instead of saying what causes crime, where it's only 5% of the variance, maybe let's focus on what causes conformity, which is 95% of the variance. And so control theory is one of these theories that's focused not on crime so much, but on conformity. What causes conformity? What causes most people to not be criminals most of the time? And we said that it was the version of the theory that's gotten the most support, meaning when researchers have gone out and tried to see if the theory is true, the version of the theory that's gotten the most support from research and data is called social bond theory. And social bond theory says the main thing that separates people who are involved in crime versus those who are conformists is that the conformists have a social bond. They're strongly bonded to their society, and they don't want to violate it. They like it. They believe in it. And the people who are violating it to some level are not bonded. They're just on the outside of it, looking in some way. And so it tries to understand what are the reasons. There's 4 elements of the bond. I'll just quickly list them. You had to watch my lecture and pay attention to the lecture to really understand them. But the parts of the bond are attachment. Do you have somebody in your life that is looking after you and that you care about? Some adult in your life that's, that you want to be like. It's like a role model idea. But somebody who really loves you, that bond. If you have a single person in the society that's not a criminal, and they love you and they're watching out for you, that's one piece of this bond that helps you also be somebody who doesn't want to violate things. That's number one. Two was involvement. Are you actually involved in things that are not crime? Are you in school? Are you in church? Are you in a job? If you're just hanging out and you got nothing going on, then we got more time for antisocial or, activities like crime. So involvement is a key, and that's the idea that idle hands are the devil's workshop. I don't know if people still say that, but this idea that when kids get bored, that's when trouble happens. So we can't let kids be idle and bored. We got to get them involved in stuff, engaged in stuff. The third one was commitment. Do you have a goal in life that you're trying to achieve, some future goal? They say in martial arts, like you can have a really strong arm if you imagine a thing in front of you that you're grabbing. And if you really imagine that, no one could bend your arm. It's the same idea here. If you've got some future goal in mind, I'm going to become that doctor, then nothing's going to knock you off that path, and you're not going to get involved in silly stuff and nonsense because your eyes are on the prize. And I recently learned this with basketball. If I lock in on the rim and just lock in with my eyes and don't move my eyes, I make the basket much more. But anyway, keep your eyes on the prize, lock in, and you will not get distracted, is the idea here. And the fourth one is belief. People have to actually believe that society will pay you off. That society isn't just playing you for a sucker, that if you're a young person staying on the straight and narrow, doing your homework, going to school, doing all the right stuff, that you will succeed. But if you don't really believe that, if you're like, oh, that's just for suckers, that's just a fake ideology, that's just, well, they're telling me, they're suckering me, they're punking me, then you're free again in your mind to go be a criminal or be antisocial. But as long as you had all four of these things in place, according to the theory, then you're going to want to be a straight and narrow person that stays on the path, that does the right thing. Now we're ready to answer your question, Lindsay, which is this a conservative theory? And if it is, what does that have to do with liberal findings? Again, this goes to the research process question, but a theory is just a theory until somebody actually tests it. And to test a theory, you have to go and look at data or collect data and analyze the data. And so that's what the research process is all about, going and collecting data and analyzing it to see what theories are true or not, or supported or not. And so conservative theory. Why is it a conservative theory? Well, it seems to say that human nature is evil. If you really believe in social bond theory, and if you're saying that the reason people aren't criminals is because they're bonded to society, then what you're also implying there is if somebody doesn't have a bond, then they are a criminal. They will be a criminal. In other words, it seems to say that the tendency to be a criminal is already there. It's already pushing you towards bad stuff. And you need this thing called the social bond to stop that beast, that evil, sinful thing inside of you from getting out. And that view that we are evil beasts inside of us, our human nature is evil, is a very conservative view. It's what the Catholic Church basically teaches. It's what a lot of conservative religious people teach, is that we humans are born sinners, and that's why we need to be very careful and very controlled about our behavior and bonded to things like the church and our priest and our dad and our mom so that we stay on the right path. So it's a conservative theory because it matches that worldview, that view of things. But what about liberal findings? So when you actually go look at data, what do you find? This theory's gotten a lot of support. In other words, when we try to explain the variance, and we look, for example, at a school that has a lot of crime, and we try to figure out which kids in the school are involved in it and which kids aren't. And you start trying to figure out what are the data points, what are the variables they're called, that would explain why these kids are in crime and they're not. Is it their dads, their home life? Is it their experiences? Is it their IQ? Is it their testosterone levels? I mean, what is it that explains why these kids are involved in the crime? And what the studies keep showing is the bond is what explains it. If they are kids that have all four of these things in place, they're not likely to be in crime. And if they aren't, if there's somebody that's missing one or more of these things, they're much more likely to be involved in crime. So the findings, the studies that collect the data support the theory. But why is it liberal? Well, it shows, for example, that family structure is not significant. There are a lot of conservatives, politicians, not scientists, who say things like, you have to have a father at home. We can't allow divorce in America. We're going to talk about that next in this class, by the way, is what does research on families tell us about families and life in America? And a lot of the research has been done on divorce. And one claim of conservative people is we shouldn't allow divorce or single parenting in America because kids raised without a dad at home are going to be much worse off than kids that do have a dad at home. And or kids whose parents are divorced are going to be confused in life and all kinds of things, and so they're going to be much worse off. That's what conservatives say, but is that what the studies find? And when we go and look at who's involved in crime or not, whether your parents are divorced or not, or whether your dad is at home or not, is not the key variable. The key variable is, are you bonded? And if you have that first element, somebody in your life, a role model, it doesn't have to be the parent. It doesn't have to be the dad. In fact, sometimes dads are terrible role models for their kids. But if you have a dad that's a drunk alcoholic and something like that, but you have a teacher or a priest or a cousin who's showing you a different path, and you care about them and they care about you, that can be just as strong a thing as having a dad that you care about and that's showing you a good path. But the point is, yeah, it'd be nice if it's your dad and mom, but it doesn't have to be. And so the data supports liberals who said, we have to allow divorce because sometimes women are in terrible relationships and they should be allowed to get out of them. And they're abusive relationships. And we have to allow single parenting because there are a lot of jerky men out there that go around, impregnating women, but that doesn't mean if you don't want abortions, you should be allowing them to have their babies. And if they have their babies, they need support to be able to raise them. And so, but conservatives will say, no, if they're not married, they're irresponsible. And she should get married or she's a bad mom. Well, there's plenty of single moms raising very good kids that are not criminals. Because it isn't about whether your parents are married or not, it's about whether you have a good bond in life with someone you care about. So family structures are important. Race and class are also not significant. A lot of conservatives, President Trump included, make the claim that white people are just better and more moral and more trustworthy than other races. And the data doesn't support that. If you go look at who's actually involved in crime or not, plenty of white people involved in crime, plenty of non-white people not involved in crime. And that's not a significant explanation for who's involved in crime or not. It doesn't hold up with the data. Same with class. We would, some conflict theorists even would assume that poor people are more involved in crime than others. But if we really define crime as broadly as it should be, there's plenty of rich people involved in crime. In fact, President Trump right now is on trial for 24 felonies, something like that. And luckily he's on trial, but he kept saying it's unprecedented. Why should I even be on trial? You should never be trying me. I'm above the law. And a lot of people in America are like, well, no, you're not. But anyway, so anyway, it's not about what your race is or your class or your parents. It's about other things. It's what's actually happening in your life. And if you have these four things, you're not likely to be involved in crime. But if you don't have them, it doesn't matter how rich you are, how white you are, you're going to be more antisocial. And I tried to bring up my own lived experiences that bear this out. I went to a very wealthy elite school on the East Coast, and I saw plenty of very wealthy elite people involved in some very heavy deviance. And I've also spent a lot of time in Cuba College with some of the poorest, most oppressed people in the country, and I've seen a lot of very honest people that work very hard and don't want to commit any crime and want to love their country and love their society. So it isn't about your race and your class. It's other things in people's lives that turn them bad. So maybe both conservatives and liberals are right, and we need to find a way to combine their views on things in the right way so we understand what really makes people tick. Okay, if you have other review questions, you can always email me. That's another way I make myself available to help you succeed. But if you don't email me, then you're not engaged and you're not doing your part. But the exam closes on Thursday at midnight, so please take it before then. Okay? All right. Bye-bye.